Good afternoon. I'm John Corman. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Studies at the School of Engineering and Applied Science. I greeted some of you earlier, but most of you are joining us now. I'm happy to take this chance to welcome all of you to SEAS and to our magnificent new home we call the SEH, the Science and Engineering Hall. Our dean, I'm not the dean, our dean, David Darling, normally would be here to welcome you, but unfortunately he came down with a severe case of the flu and just could not make it. So he sends his regrets, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of him as well. So this is our 9th R&D showcase, but this is our first large-scale event that we're holding in our new home. We just moved in here early January. So it's been designed, just for this sort of thing where we do research, teaching, and we'd like to welcome our outside guests and experts to join us and teach us new things, and hopefully you'll learn a few new things being here at the SEH. We have talk about a large building. Of course, it takes so much to fill it in. And for those of you who are familiar, we've been hiring a fairly large number of faculty, at least for our scale, last couple of years. In the past 6 years, we've hired 44 new faculty. On the student side, our undergraduate enrollment has increased by 34%. Our graduate enrollment has increased by 37%. Speaking of growth, our R&D showcase is also on a path of growth. This is our 9th one, as I mentioned. Just to give you a scale, yesterday we had our student poster competition, and we had close to 140 participants. These are mostly graduate students and many undergraduate students, all participating in our research projects. And the largest number we had before this was last year, where it was 80. So that gives you a sort of a scale of what we're doing. Of course, this whole thing would not have been possible without the generous help and of our sponsors. We have a record sponsorship this year. So I'd like to thank our sponsors, and starting with our platinum sponsor, Leidos. So I'd like to appreciate the help of Leidos, and we're very thankful. I'd like to also thank LGS Innovations, Capital Construction Associates, ISIS, Dr. Sassan and Mrs. Ghazal Kimyavi, Dovel Technologies, Wraith Nanofabrication, and Open Concepts. So please join me in giving them a round of applause for their generous help. In just a moment, I'm going to turn over the microphone to Mr. Naeem Hussain, who will lead our panel discussion on cybersecurity. It's a very, as you know, popular topic, important topic, assessing America's cybersecurity preparedness. So we look forward to learning from them. And Mr. Hussain is the founder of the management consulting firm Agile Trailblazers, and a member of our SEAS National Advisory Committee. So we're very thankful for his help and participation in this. And he very kindly did most of the participation, the coordination and planning for this event, for this timely event. So we're very appreciative of that. Mr. Hussain will introduce the rest of the panel to you, but let me first thank you, our panelists, for being here at our new home, and for educating us on your perspectives on cybersecurity. So thank you very much for being here. So we're looking forward to the discussion. Just as a bit of logistics, after this, this panel will last for 1 hour. After this, we will have our student poster presenters. They will be right next door. And at 5 o'clock, we'll have our keynote speaker as well as our award presentation for our student winners. So thank you very much, and look forward to a discussion.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us here for this important panel discussion, assessing America's cybersecurity preparedness. My name is Naeem Hussain. I'm the founder of Agile Trailblazers and a proud GW alum, as well as I serve on the SEAS National Advisory Council. I'm honored today to serve as the moderator for this event with 4 of our country's most important stakeholders of Information and Cybersecurity. And so on my left here, we have Ms. Rupangi Kadakia, Web Services Executive of NASA. We have Anil Katarki, Chief Information Security Officer of HP Enterprise Services. Stephanie of Von Friedberg, CIO and VP of Information and Technology Solutions at the World Bank Group. And finally, Mr. Robert Zitz, Senior Vice President and Chief Systems Architect at Leidos. So thank you very much again, gentlemen and ladies, for joining us today. So I would like to begin this with having each of the panelists begin with some opening remarks. So Rob, why don't we begin with you?
Okay, thank you, and thanks to school. I'd like to really open by letting the students know in the room here that we need you. We desperately need your help in both public and private sector regarding cybersecurity. When you think about cybersecurity, some people would call it a team sport. It's really a whole of nation approach. It's got to be a robust blending of academia, government, and industry to be able to defeat the threat. The threat is significant. This isn't just about denial of service or not getting to your email. This is about and includes attacks against our critical infrastructure, which could be catastrophic. So thanks for having us today. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much. Stephanie, you want to go next?
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I'm glad I could be here today. I have actually, like you, been looking at universities to figure out where do we find the best talent in areas like cybersecurity. Hiring good staff who can stay with us over the long haul has been a challenge for us as an organization, so opportunities like this it's great for us to actually find talented students. And I would also say that for me, cybersecurity is important in everything that we do. And my own view is that it can be detrimental to the world, but if we get it right, if we get the technology right and we get the security right, we can actually make the world a better place, which is really what the World Bank is all about. How do we do development better? And we can't do development better if we are under attack from nation states or rogue actors who are after our information. So it's an important piece of what we do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again. Anil Katarki, really honored to be here. I'm also a graduate of the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. So again, I couldn't agree more with my colleagues here, right? We definitely need people who can work in the field of cybersecurity. There is a real lack of talent. There is, a real need for, new graduates, who can come out, can help us win this battle, I would say, if I can call it that. And these are, critical times. When you look at IT, there is, what we call the new style of IT, right? So these are real disruptors at this time. Everybody hears about cloud, everybody hears about mobility, virtualization. We all want to, go through this transformation. We want to embark on this journey. But the question is, how do we get there securely, right? And so as clearly the benefits are there, businesses can't afford to ignore that anymore. We have to embark on this journey. Now the question is, how do we do it securely? And so hopefully over the next hour or so, we'll talk about the challenges and how we're going to overcome those.
Great. Rupangi?
Thank you. I would say the most important thing is no matter what, for the students especially, no matter what field you go into, you're going to run into, if you understand cybersecurity, you will be a differentiator. You will be competitive. You will, no matter what profession you decide, whether it's mechanical engineering to medical science or device manufacturing, it will not matter. Cybersecurity is going to be part of whatever you decide to do with your careers. And the second point is really about the fact that it's an amazing, amazing career opportunity. Even if you want to go into cybersecurity itself, it's great because how many other careers you have a challenge every other minute. So it's a fun career experience. Great.
Thank you. So just for the audience, I want to set the tone here in terms of how we're going to go about this. We have solicited questions and we're going to actually incorporate those questions into this discussion that we're going to have. And we've got a plenty laundry list of questions out here today. So I don't know if we can actually get through all of them. We'll make sure that we get to most of them at least. So my first question here is, Rob, I'm going to direct this towards you. So what does cybersecurity entail? Help us understand what are the parameters that are there, and also how would you classify or categorize the cybersecurity threats?
Okay, well, first start with what do we mean by cybersecurity? Oftentimes people talk about it in terms of information assurance, information security. Really, what we're talking about is the information that we use today, and frankly, all of our society and all of our work and health and everything is based now on the information flow through the internet, that the ability to have the networks, the systems, and the data that you're using, no matter what domain you're involved in, what part of business or public sector you're involved in, those networks that allow you to connect people who do work with the systems and with the data must be protected, must be guarded. And so when we talk about cybersecurity, we're saying prevent intrusions from external individuals or actors getting inside of your network, into your systems, into your data, to be able to disrupt, destroy, steal, prevent them from getting in. And now more and more you hear people talking about the insider threat. So ensuring that the people who've been granted access to your systems, to your network, to your data, that they're doing the right thing with it, that they're guarding it and protecting it and handling it in a right way. So when we think of cybersecurity, we think of both the insider piece and the external piece.
Great. And so, Anil, from your vantage point, when you look at the events that occurred in 2014, and as you project out and look at 2015, where are the major cybersecurity threats coming from, or where is this going for us?
So good question. So 2014, I would think was, like a major defining year for us, right, in cybersecurity. The one event that really stands out in my mind was the Sony hack. And the reason, it was, I think, significant is, in the past, when we've seen, like attacks or companies being breached, it's always, like, how can I monetize this? How can I, like, benefit from this, right? But this was the first time, we saw a company being attacked, to the core. And really, it was all about, like, we had a dictator in a foreign country trying to impose some type of censorship on, like, what the citizens in this country, can do, which was, significant. That's not how we do here, right? We can't let other countries dictate what we do. Like freedom of speech, freedom of liberty. That's really important. The other piece was, I think it was the first time America actually publicly laid blame on a foreign country and said, this is the country that's behind this attack. We've never seen that happen. So that was, I think, significant. It also highlighted, how powerful our adversaries are, when it comes to cyber capabilities. 2015, again, the year started out with a bang. You see Anthem breach. All of a sudden we have all these, PII data for, millions of subscribers being exposed. And the trend continues. And we're going to see more and more of these type of attacks. Some will be to obviously, monetize and benefit from this, but in some cases it's really, there is political agendas being driven, or you have what we call, APTs, advanced persistent threats from, nation states, which I think we'll continue to see more of those.
So lots of these bad actors are probably putting a lot of emphasis and resources behind these security breaches and threats as well. Absolutely. So anyone wants to add something to it?
I would say one of the other unique things, I'm sure panelists agree, about the Sony attack was, in the past we've kind of put categories of attacks. You had criminal activity where people were clearly just trying to steal money for their own personal gain. You had others who were perhaps terrorists wanting to do something like get into the critical infrastructure to be able to disrupt it and cause mayhem or even death. You had state actors who were doing it for various reasons that surrounded state versus state issues. This was the conjunction of all three, the intersection of all three. Remember, this was also spilled over then into a physical threat, where we were told, oh, by the way, if you go to the movie theaters, we will attack you and kill you at the theater, if you recall. So this was really an unusual intersection of all of the bad acting that we have seen in cyber.
Right. So over the years, the information security threat as well as cybersecurity threat has significantly evolved, as we know, right, over the decades. And perhaps the conversation that actually now occurs in boardrooms and executive management teams are different. So if, Stephanie, you could elaborate a little bit about how those conversations look like from your vantage point.
It's changed a lot. So I have to say, when I took this job 5 years ago, I had a couple friends say, you must be crazy. CIOs lose their job over security breaches. You're not going to have your job for more than 18 months. That's the average life of a CIO. Since that time, I think, the Snowden leaks sort of started it. All the Target, the Home Depot attacks certainly helped public awareness. And I think Sony was, at least for our institution, one of those final straws where we said, it's a relatively simple hack, but it's a nation state. And we now know that those kinds of things can happen. So I think that awareness has brought the management in many organizations, as well as the board, asking the question now, okay, not we're going to assume we're safe, but how do we keep ourselves safe? And how do we create a risk frame that we can afford? So there's an acceptability curve, and where is that acceptability curve company by company, and how much does that cost? And I still get the question, how much do you need to spend to keep us safe? And I think our answer has always been, there isn't an answer to that question. How much risk are you willing to tolerate? And so the nature of the conversation is shifting, in my view, in a very positive way, with people understanding this is going to happen, and what's our posture once it happens? And what do we spend to protect ourselves and our reputation on the downside?
So Rupangi, you have actually been a Chief Information Security Officer prior in your career, and now you have moved on to a different role. So do you view executive management conversations and other leadership conversations any differently?
I absolutely do. So part of what I have been noticing is it's also making sure, and I think you alluded to this, you have to make sure that you can actually talk the language of your executive management, whether it is from a mission perspective, like at NASA. Do I talk about IT to the Human Exploration Directorate administrator, or do I really talk to them about the risk, the business risk or the mission risk, and how we can help mitigate that? So the conversation's changing, and if you change the conversation to a point where it now is part of that business risk direction that they want to take, then they will take you seriously. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want them to think that it's just about IT at that point. It's really about their business or their mission.
Right, which is a very interesting topic, because a lot of us do not take our security, cybersecurity and our personal information security very seriously. Even in organizations, we are constantly looking at our IT organizations, right? And specifically, there's the security component of our IT organizations to actually protect us. So how do you suggest organizations go about building this whole concept of security is everyone's business?
Well, that's a very good question. So if you think about it, and a lot of folks in organizations, they look at security awareness training. I mean, even in my own organization, you do an annual security awareness training, and you check the box, and that is done. But is that really is that effective? Does that make you more secure? I have a couple of ideas. So some of the things that I have seen work in many different organizations I have worked in is having security be part of your performance. So whether or not you are somebody in the IT field, whether you are an analyst, whether you are the CEO, have that as part of the performance. It doesn't mean you're going to get fired, but that is part of your bonus packages. It's part of how you make decisions, or how decisions are made about your performance. Another thing is really try to target your message, because the only time people change behavior, and that's really where you're looking at when you want to make things everybody's business, is you have to make sure that there's motivation on people wanting to change that behavior. Right. So you have to target those folks.
Right. Any other ideas?
Well, I would add to that. I think that's exactly right. I would add that you've got to inculcate in people from day one and every day that this is about the business. Now, the business of making money, if you're out in the private sector, the bottom line is impacted. There's a fiduciary responsibility. You lose money, you lose branding, you lose, and guess what? Then you lose your job because of market share declines. People have to understand in the business, in the line aspect of the business, that this is about making money or losing money. It's not just the IT department. And I spent most of my adult life in government, in the intelligence community, in Homeland Security. It's about the mission. Will the mission succeed or not? I mean, you have to feel it. You have to taste it and understand as a mission owner, as an analyst, as an operator, that the thing that you're trying to accomplish may well not happen, may go horribly wrong. Lives may be on the line in many of these missions, and it may go wrong because you didn't take the steps necessary to protect the network, the data, the information. It's real, and they've got to feel it, they've got to taste it, they've got to experience it.
Right, and Stephanie, from your perspective, you have to deal with this and actually, Anil, both of you, right, have this large global organization that you have to run. How do these motivations differ from one country to another?
I don't think that the motivations necessarily differ from one country to another, but I think it has somewhat to do with what Rapungi said. And I think actually my CISO's here, and one of the things we did 3 years ago was to say, listen, we've put a lot of speed bumps, we put a lot of cones in the road, we're slowing them down, but we're not having impact. So what's another way to look at this? And we actually went back and looked at all of our information and created different categories of information. And now our cybersecurity strategy is really around how do you keep those crown jewels safe? How do you just unsecure and stop spending money on the stuff that's publicly available anyway? And that's, I think, started to shift. But the corresponding piece to that is helping our staff, wherever they are in the world, understand that this piece of information is confidential. So you can't use Dropbox, right? This piece of information is public. Put it in Dropbox. And you know, that kind of educational over and over and over again about what is their responsibility to the information, what kind of information is it, how's it being categorized. I think that's one of our biggest challenges.
Right.
To me, I mean, you know, when I look at cybersecurity, it's like a boxing match, right? I mean, it just never stops. It goes on, and the beating never stops. So,
So the rounds never end.
Hammered, I mean, like, you know, constantly. So the way we've looked at this is, I mean, how do we shrink the attack surface, right? I mean, you know, so we are so widely exposed. I mean, like, and at the end of the day, I mean, jobs or CISOs like me is, I mean, how do we shrink this attack surface? So one simple thing we said, I mean, like, you know, we got, you know, 300,000 employees. I mean, like, you know, how do we turn all of them into our first line of defense, right? So I'm a firm believer. I mean, like, you know, yes, everybody's budgets are shrinking. I mean, the dollars are, I mean, like, you know, scarce. But every dollar we spend on some type of security awareness and training, I mean, like, you know, is really money well spent, right? And you got all these technologies, but let's go back and look at all these hacks. I mean, if you look at the hacks are all going back to some simple basic things. Somebody clicked on an email link. Somebody shared a password, right? Somebody, I mean, like, you know, was naive enough to, I mean, like, you know, be a subject of social engineering or, I mean, some type of hack. So it all comes down to, I mean, like, you know, how aware your users are. I mean,
So how do you make people aware of that in these organizations?
Well, just like, you know, once we have programs in place, I mean, like, you know, we go through the usual security awareness and training. I mean, we form communities of interest, I mean, within the company. We also try to make the trainings that we provide relevant to the users, right? I mean, like, let's say there is the holiday season. I mean, like, you know, you put out bulletins warning people about how to be savvy cyber shoppers, I mean, like, you know, during those times. Or, I mean, like, you know, anytime you try to make the training relevant to the end users, I think it drives home the point, right? As opposed to, here, take this long training, I mean, like, you know, just check a box and move on. I mean, nobody pays attention. But by trying to make it relevant, I mean, like, you know, we're trying to get, I guess, squeeze, I mean, like, the most out of it.
Right.
Can I just add?
Yes,
well, two things. One, we do a lot of phishing exercises, so we create our own phishing, and it's surprising what people are willing to click on. Some of them have gotten pretty sophisticated, and I myself stop and think, did these guys make this up, or is this real? So it helps, right, because it's ever present in your mind. But I think one of the interesting things that the bank did recently, because we have the same issue with attack surfaces. So we have 186 country offices. We had a Lotus Notes environment with servers in every single country office. And as we looked at it, we said, you know, the easier way to do this is to lift ourselves into the cloud. Let's go with a modern email system that we understand that someone else is managing us. We know where the data centers are. We know where our email is. And we can pull all of those servers out of our country offices. And so while people are afraid of the cloud, for us, it was a way to solve a problem that made us more secure than we were in the past. So I think you have to be creative about how you apply technology in thinking about your security posture.
Great. Let me just pile on and say it's also helping people understand security is security, whether or not it's physical or virtual. And so you think about it at your home. Do you just leave all your windows open and your doors unlocked? I mean, because, hey, you know, something might happen, maybe it won't. Do you take the electrical outlets off and so the wires are exposed and at night just try to plug something? No, you don't do that because you're conditioned to understand that there's something about physical security that's important.
It's tangible, right?
Yeah.
Yes, and so this is the same thing, and helping people understand it's the same thing.
So over the past few years, it just seems that cyber criminals seem to always have the upper hand, and they're always ahead of us, and we seem to be in this defensive game most of the time. Are there any new defensive technologies, or how are we going to change this posture, that we find ourselves in?
I'll start out and say that a moment ago we were talking about what I would call hygiene, the basic hygiene. And that would be don't have your password be password, right? I mean, simple things like that. But those basic building blocks are so critical. They're the foundation, and we have to continually educate about that. The second thing, and I use the word continually, the second is to move from aperiodic, whether it's training or review of the data, the networks for intrusions, to continuous. And so you will hear now both private and public sector, DHS, for example, talking about continuous diagnostic and mitigation. And the reason it's continuous is if an adversary gets inside of your network, we've found historically that on average it's months that they're inside of your databases. Imagine the damage that is being done, data that's exfiltrated, disruptions that occur. You don't want to have months go by before you find out. You want to have nanoseconds go by before you find out that the intrusion. So moving to a continuous diagnostic and mitigation is a second level. Then I would just quickly add that a next level is to get beyond signatures. So we often today rely on a signature of a past attack, much like when we have an inoculation for a virus, it's based on somebody's already been sick. We already saw the virus, we have a signature of it, we build an antidote. The problem is if it mutates at all in biology or in cybersecurity, if it's at all different, you don't catch it. And so signatures are important, they're useful, but they're not the end all. So to get beyond that is the next level. And I think a lot of firms and the government are experimenting with ways to try to find new approaches to stop the attack before it starts.
Yeah, and I think it has to do with blending different kinds of science together. So I think the next wave, at least for us, is going to be behavioral. So what are we seeing inside of our network that's different than we've seen before? So, every day Stephanie comes to work, she turns her computer on and she does X. Well, she didn't do X today, she did Z, Y. And that's going to take a lot of behavioral science that IT people don't necessarily have or know, but I think mirroring those kinds of sciences together is going to happen so that we actually know these guys have been in my network for a nanosecond, not for 2 or 3 months. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that kind of technology coming at us pretty fast.
Absolutely. I mean, to just add to, what Stephanie said, right? There is no dearth of data. I mean, we have gazillion, sensors deployed. We collect all types of information. I think, in our typical SOC, we see at least 10 million events come through, every day, just in public sector. Right? Question is, what do you do with this data? How quickly can you distill? How quickly can you identify, any type of anomalies, right? So where I see cybersecurity trending next is applying, big data analytics, right? So there's all this data. How do we crunch this information? How do we provide, the right information to the right people at the right time, right? Situational awareness is going to be the key. So as we go into the next couple of years, I really see big data, playing a huge part here and trying to give us that information, in nanoseconds. I think the average, that I've seen in the industry is, they say when you are breached, before you discover that you're breached, it's 272 days. That's not acceptable, right? That's a year. These guys are in there doing whatever they have to do, exfiltrating data. So how do we narrow that window?
So talking about data, Rupang, you have an incredible job to actually deal with data from multiple sources for many, many years, right? So how do you go about securing all these multiple feeds?
I think we've talked a little bit about that, where you have to really understand what your data is worth. So I look at it from a 3-step perspective. So you have data. You have to know what your data is. But then you have to really look at, okay, what are you going to do with that data? And that's really your information. That's your information management part. And that's a very different way of looking at what security controls you need, because information is going to be a very different way of than understanding what your data is classified as. But then the third phase, which we're not even there yet for a lot of, it's really knowledge management. which is now what are you going to do with that data, and how will that make an impact on your mission? So I try to look at data from 3 different perspectives, and when I start talking to people about security and how to secure data and how they should be utilizing their small budgets on protecting data or information or knowledge, I try to make sure that I know what phase of their thought process that they are.
Great. So it's not a question then of if, but when a breach is going to occur for organizations today, right? So what is this term cyber resilience?
So resiliency in cybersecurity basically means that can you operate, can you do your business even if you're breached? So you have to just assume that people are inside your network. They have access to what you are thinking is your crown jewels. How do you actually mitigate that, make that as a small enough footprint so it does not have a competitive impact on you or financial impact, or as small of a competitive or financial impact as possible? How do you actually operate your critical systems even while you are being breached? I think it's a very different, it's a culture change, because now you have to really start looking at how does this fit in with the business risk model? Because you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to have a resiliency model for every single piece of data you have. But you could have a very, very comprehensive and robust resiliency model that you can use. Lots of different resiliency frameworks that are around that I've seen. MITRE has one. There's a resiliency framework for financial institutions. The Software Engineering Institute has one. But they're not check the box. So you have to really look at, okay, what are you trying to protect? Resiliency, I think, is going to be the only way we're going to be able to be competitive in the future, because bad guys are going to be in your networks. That's just a given. They probably are. I know they are in NASA's. I guarantee it, no matter what anybody says.
Anyone else want to add something to it?
Another aspect of resiliency is here we are in the School of Engineering. Now, I think more and more people understand that if you're going to build a big program, whether it's a weapon system or information system or whatever it is, you've got to have throughout your systems engineering life cycle, every step of the way, it's got to be baked in. I mean, years past, and really not that long ago, people thought of cyber as something you bolt on or staple on at the end of the process. Now we understand it has to be everything. Because as you talk about advanced persistent threats, I mean, they're moving down the stack to where it's on the chip, right? And so your supply chain has to be protected and so on and so forth. Resilience means all of the above.
So, you were mentioning to me earlier when we were discussing this whole aspect of deploying software in rapid timeframes, 1 week or less, into these production environments. Security is paramount, and specifically from your background, being a Chief Information Security Officer, how do you view this new role, in terms of, I think you're transferring about 150 applications for NASA to the cloud?
Yep. So from a NASA perspective, we've been able to migrate over 150 applications into the public cloud. And some of these are public applications. Some of them are very sensitive applications that process very sensitive data. The important thing is a lot of times, people think, oh, okay, I still need to focus on how I did business before. So my system development lifecycle, my processes that I use for system engineering have to be the same to get the security that I thought I needed. However, what I'm finding is that you can use very good agile development processes and still not compromise the security. And it's really interesting. It's really about how small of those iterative steps that you take. And can you actually take that little bit of an iterative step for the next cycle of your agile development and make sure that that's secure? We have been really working hard to figure out how do you integrate some of those processes so that your entire system does not have an impact, does not lower its security posture. At the same time, what this gives is it gives the stakeholder, gives the developers, and it also gives the budget folks the right information at the right time, because now I can really quantify how much I'm spending on security on very small chunks and say, I am still securing this, but I'm using that agile development process, which I think is going to be the only way to go forward. For businesses, it's your competitive edge. How quickly can you, Facebook, think about Facebook. Every single week they have app updates. You have to be in that mode. You have to make sure that the security processes are built into that very quick agile development process.
Other thoughts?
Well, our firm, I think, is known for agile development, particularly in DoD and the intelligence community. And I will tell you, it's not just software, and I know you understand that. It's a mindset. Right. And so the idea is that you're iterating continuously with your client, your customer, understanding how their circumstances are changing, their threat is changing, and you're able to continually update and change the path you're moving on depending on the circumstances. And obviously our adversaries, the folks who are launching these cyber attacks, they're agile. They're very agile. And we have got to be faster and smarter and better than them if we have a hope that this boxing match is going to end in the way we want it to end.
So how has your leadership style for all of you panelists changed over the years as the threats have evolved? What's the message back to your teams, to your direct reports, and so forth?
I can go first. I think what Stephanie was saying earlier, right? Do you know what your crown jewels are? Really, it's impossible. We all have limited resources. I can't possibly throw a body at every problem we have, or put a sensor on the network for every an application we want to monitor. Right? That's not going to cut it. So it's really trying to take your limited resources and trying to focus it on those crown jewels. So one, I would say, we spend a lot of time trying to this is really 4 key areas we focus on. One is asset management. Do I know what I have on my network, right? If I don't know what I have, I can't protect it. Do I know what the baseline configuration should look like for these systems? So anytime they deviate from their baseline, do I have the ability to quickly identify the deviation from the baseline so we can bring it back to baseline, right? So that's the next. Then you have, your vulnerability management. How often do you scan these systems? How often do you patch these systems? One of the easy things for the bad guys to do is, go after these weak, vulnerable systems, right? If a system's not patched, guess what? That's just an easy target waiting to be picked on, right? So what methods do you have to identify, where those vulnerabilities on your network? How quickly can you go out and remediate those? Do you have programs in place that help you manage this consistently? Right? It can't be a heroic effort. One time I go out and do this, and then I sit back and think everything is good. Right? Can you do this consistently? Can you do this in a repeatable manner? So that's another area we focus on. So it's just simple hygiene. Robert was saying.
Great. So we're going to switch a little bit more and get into some policy discussion over here. So the recent cyber attacks on Sony really is a game changer. And together with the stuff that actually happened with Target and Home Depot and the federal government, President Obama has now proposed a Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center. What's your opinion on this new agency? Is this something that's going to help us in the future?
Well, having worked in DHS, the part of DHS that did cybersecurity, and I oversaw that for a few years, I know that there's some confusion now about whether or not that new cell that's being stood up under the Director of National Intelligence is in some way going to be conflict with or overlap or be duplication of effort with what DHS is doing. And having had a foot in both camps, I can tell you, no, that's not going to be the case. That what this is about is, from my understanding, there's classified information and sensitive information that the intelligence community has immediate and continuous access to. Department of Homeland Security's NCIC, which is the Cyber and Communications Integration Center, it does have some access to intelligence, but by and large, it's designed to work directly with the rest of U.S. government and with the private sector, particularly the private sector, where 85% of the critical infrastructure resides. What this is about is having the intelligence synthesized inside of the intelligence community, and then that information being provided to DHS's NCIC, and therefore to the rest of the private sector that they're working with. I see this as an input to the NCIC, not as a duplication of the NCIC, NCIC being DHS's center.
I think the jury is still out, right? So the initiative was just announced. What it is, it's just an agency that's going to fuse all this information, whether it's from the NSA, whether it's from the FBI or DHS, and try to, synthesize this information and provide it back to, the user community so we can take corrective measures. So now the question becomes, are each of these agencies individually able to, coordinate this type of, threat data and distribute it back so we can take some actions? Or does it need a separate agency to really coordinate all of this? Right. And I think it's modeled after the national counterterrorism thing that we have. So in my opinion, it's too early. Again, the jury is out. In due course, we will figure out whether this model works or it's just another layer of bureaucracy.
So any kind of communication that has to happen, whether it's within the agencies or with multiple countries, other countries that we have to actually collaborate with, is all based on trust, right? And so, any thoughts on where the world is going with cybersecurity and trust building across nations? Anyone want to take that question?
Well, in my view, the horrific acts that we see in the physical world that has galvanized the world recently with some of the barbarism that we've seen, it galvanizes people and makes them realize we've got to work to a common goal. I think in the virtual world, it's becoming more and more clear to people that this is not about loss of even finances, that this is about physical destruction that can occur. And I think that we already have built collaborative ventures with our allies, but I think you're going to see much more of that as the attacks persist and as damage is done and as physical damage results. I mean, people have heard in the news recently about the possibility of intrusions into our electrical power grid, but I'm not sure that a lot of folks really understand what that means. And I'm not sure a lot of people understand yet that food, water, power, transportation, and yes, finances all depend on your systems running and running properly. And if they're not running properly, a lot of bad things can ensue.
Right, and we talked about in our earlier discussions about like almost a collapse of the society when these fundamental services are not available, causing some real destruction like we've seen with Sandy and Katrina and so forth.
But we have a long way to go.
Yeah.
So in this one, the glass is more half empty from my perspective. You work in an international organization. It's easier for you to share information with Citibank in the U.S. than it is for you to call your subsidiary in Germany and try to share a cyber threat that you see. The legislative landscape is such a mess for countries to share information across and private corporations to share information across. We are a long way from being able to coordinate and work together. Way further than we are from a physical perspective, and we're struggling with that in some of these countries.
It's a very challenging thing to do, right? So as a company, for example, HP is a global company. So part of, if you look at the new defense acquisition regulations or the new executive order, and it requires companies like HP to disclose, if there is a breach, right? If we have a breach on our corporate systems, we're supposed to disclose that. The question starts to become now, if I disclose information to the U.S. government, how will my, European Union, country governments, view it? What about, our partners in Asia Pacific? Will they want to continue to do business with HP if we are disclosing information on breaches to the U.S. government? So but at the same time, we have an obligation to do so. That's what gets our lawyers all, wrapped around the axle. The debates go on and on. How can we disclose? What can we share? There are even talks about, do we really need to start carving out HP's back office IT system specifically for, the Americas or the U.S. just to meet these mandates. So it's a very complicated, issue.
An optimistic, be a glass half full on this would be, and here we are again, and this is science and engineering in this building. And there are ways that we can use, innovative ways to automate processes so we can strip off personally identifiable information, or PII, so that a firm can share information with other firms and with the government without that customer, that consumer, that client's information being caught up in that. We can do that. Software can do that. We need the bright minds that are here to help with that. And then the other thing is the information sharing. Trust means that if I give you something, you give me something back. We do that so many times, we realize, hey, we didn't hurt each other. Well, that can also be automated. In fact, one of the things we're hoping to see a lot more of now is an automated process where threat information is automatically shared between government and industry. And this is now the threat, not the PII data.
Right.
Because if I'm in the private sector and I hear the government saying, hey, I'm the government, I'm here to help, and they take stuff from me, but never seem to give me actionable information back in return,
Right.
that's a problem. It's got to be two-way street.
So lots of new technologies coming on the horizon. All of you are involved with moving stuff over to the cloud, into those virtual environments, new applications coming in every day, lots of open source code out there. How do you deal with managing those sorts of applications and the threats that come together with them, especially if the code is not being even developed here in the US?
So from an open source perspective, I actually find that transparency is a very key piece for better security. Part of the problem is just because you have code that a company built that's proprietary does not necessarily make it more secure.
Right.
I can have 50 people for 50 users across the world, the country, or in my own organization look at code that's open source and try to break into it. I can't do that when it's proprietary code. So I think it's actually the right step in the right direction for better security, because it's going to be security through transparency rather than from hiding behind proprietary information. So I actually encourage the use of open source as much as possible. Now, it's very interesting. So from a reputational perspective, when that type of code, especially open source, gets breached, why did you use that? First thing, it's a blame game. But once you start explaining, but at least you know about it, and you start saying, and I have a mitigation strategy, and I can actually clean this up for you, then the whole conversation changes. So I think it's a culture change. I'll tell you, the most important thing has been really about people. Cybersecurity, technology is very important, processes are very important, but it's really about changing culture, changing how people really view security. And that's where open source and a lot of the new technologies coming in. Can we keep these folks going in that same direction?
So it's an interesting question, and I don't think it has to do with the source of the code. I think it goes back to something you said, Robert. When I started, security was the last stop in any application we would release into production. And there was always a problem. And they were the police, and everybody hated security, and right? Thinking about redesigning process so that the security teams and the enterprise architect teams are at the start, right? And they're looking at everything these application teams are doing, and that there's checkpoints along the way. And we've tried to redo our entire process to ensure that those checkpoints are happening, is the fundamentally different driver that allows you to use the best code and the cheapest code, and in many cases open sources is, to get the best application you can and make it as safe as possible.
Well, it goes back to what Stephanie said earlier, too, about risk management. I mean, this is a risk calculation. There's a lot of benefit from open source, from open architectures, but there are also some pitfalls. And so maybe you don't use that on your most sensitive. I wouldn't want to use that for my nuclear code, right, or something like that. But then there are other things that it's perfectly acceptable, it's fine, it brings innovation to the forefront.
So technology seems to be everywhere now. We seem to be connected all the time. There's this Internet of Things happening, sensors, big data, all sorts of information being harnessed for advertising and so forth. So how do you design for the security for Internet of Things, and what are the ramifications as such?
So I'm not sure that we've actually designed individually at the bank for the Internet of Things, but when I think about it, I get excited. So one, I love the idea that I can turn my dishwasher on at work when I've forgotten. But when I also think about what does it mean for development, the Internet of Things is exciting. The idea that you could actually have a medical device in a prenatal facility, somewhere in, deep in India, and use the Bharti Airtel network to send it back to Mayo Clinic to have somebody actually help that woman is really important to us. And so from my perspective, and I think this is the challenge for each one of the students in this room, the internet was not designed to be the backbone of the US economy or to be the backbone of the international economy, nor was it designed initially to house all of these devices and all these sensors and all the places where we're gathering data. So I think the question is, how do you redesign the internet? And how do you create Internet 2.0 that makes it safe? Because once we get there, I think our security posture is going to change, and our ability to gather data in the right way, in a way that people are allowing to give you that data, is going to be good for the economy, and it's going to be good for development.
Probably increase a lot of the confidence of people if we can get to that spot. Right?
Yeah.
Anyone wants to add any thoughts to this?
Well, I mean, this is one. I mean, I have a glass half empty sort of. I mean, like view into this, right? Being a security person, to me, I mean, anytime you put an IP address on something, it can be hacked or it can be breached. So, I mean, it's not a good feeling. I mean, now everything is connected. I mean, like, everything, I mean, is reachable. Everything is addressable. So it does, I mean, introduce a lot of challenges, right? I mean, and especially with the new style of IT, the boundaries are blurring. I mean, no longer do we have the luxury of saying, this is my system, or this is, I mean, like, the boundary. I mean, it's all out there. I mean, it's in the cloud. Things are interconnected. So you're right. I mean, the next generation, I mean, I guess the challenge is for the students in this room and others, I mean, people in Silicon Valley is, I mean, like, figuring out, I mean, yes, we've connected everything. We've, I mean, like, made everything reachable. Now, how do we start, I mean, like, building that security into it, right? Luckily, I mean, it's no longer, security is not an afterthought anymore. I mean, like, security is incorporated into a lot of these from the ground up. So there are, I mean, like, preventive measures being built into these devices. But just like anything else, I mean, the bad guys are also looking at how can I subvert those, I mean, like, protections that are built in. So to me at this point, I mean, it's really anything that has an IP can be breached. And it's, now the question is, what do I want to breach? I mean, how can I monetize something? I mean, people get paranoid about, I mean, the cars have, I mean, like, all these types of, I mean, computers, chips, I mean, like, built into them, and can those be hacked? Absolutely. But look about it. I mean, what good does it do to I mean, like, a hacker if I hack into your car right now? I mean, there is no money to be made unless I can hold, I mean, like, an entire company ransom and say at one time I can hack into, I mean, like, all the Ford cars, I mean, of a particular model driving on the road. Other than that, I mean, there is no value yet, but I mean, it's just a matter of time.
So what research topics do you think folks should be focusing on to enhance cybersecurity from a research perspective?
From a research perspective, I think we touched on automation, but let's take that to high-end automation. We need to be able to detect anomalous behavior not only inside of the networks, but externally. And then that gets into, when you're talking about open source, there's another use of that terminology, open source, and that is to be able to look at what's going on in the real world in terms of just openly available information. Because one of the things, I was federal law enforcement for a short period of time, and one of the things I learned was that bad actors just can't help but talk to each other. They're talking to each other in the planning stage and the execution stage, and then afterwards bragging about it and getting ready for the next run. And that information can be available and could help to understand what the threat vector is before it comes. So this whole idea of automating the processes to be able not only to defend ourselves, but to have automated processes and sensors to let us know something's headed our way before it even gets to the outer perimeter.
Right. So, all of you mentioned the need to actually have cybersecurity talent and expertise available. So what can academic and research institutions do to actually build that talent pool to actually secure our country?
So from my perspective, the most important element is to make interdisciplinary studies for students, because you can be really good in IT and you can understand, the technology that drives cybersecurity and cyber threat. But if you can't apply that every single day, either to the business that you're working for, to the healthcare organization you're involved in, whatever your other discipline is, you are not going to be able to put it to valuable use. And the best people that we have in my organization today are people that can cross those boundaries. They can talk to the business about where they're at risk. They can understand where the risk drivers might be coming from, because they understand some other discipline that comes to the table to make them more valuable.
Great. Anil, you want to add something to it?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think when you and I were having a conversation earlier, I said, I mean, it's really, you need people that not only understand the technology, but you need to also understand the business impact, right? Because only when you bridge the two can you achieve, I mean, that true, what I call risk management, or I mean, have a system in place to manage your risks. Too often, I mean, we get too focused on the technology. I mean, we look at security as black and white. And I think that's a mistake we make, because I could make something the most secure thing, but if I can't accomplish, I mean, from a business standpoint, what the business is trying to achieve, I mean, as a mission, then what good is it to me, right? I mean, so unless we start looking at security as a business enabler, and so I think the new people who come into cybersecurity, the students who are trying to enter into cybersecurity, I really want you to look at it as how do you make security a business enabler? I mean, it's not just about, hacking into something or stopping the bad guys, which is all important. But at the end of the day, it really has to lead to achieving some type of mission. So.
I think one thing maybe makes some of the engineering students laugh a little bit, but spend some time with your liberal arts colleagues, because no matter what we do in terms of engineering and science, if we can't convey it in a way that the person who's going to make the money decision understands, they're not going to do it.
Yep.
So we've got to be able to translate that, and oftentimes that means more of a liberal arts, poli-sci approach to explaining what you do. The other thing is I would encourage everybody who's in a program at this level to also be reaching back and talking to community colleges, high schools, elementary schools, everyone, because we hear people, it's overused now, but digital native, right? I mean, the kids that are 3, 4, 5 years old, I mean, they really get the stuff and they know how to do things. Now, we have to really have people get excited about the idea that this is about securing everything that you do and enjoy, and we need people in a pipeline that will come into both private and public sector.
So we are here at the tail end of our discussion, and so my last question to all of you panelists is, what message and advice do you have for students in the audience who are going to be instrumental in actually building the next generation security, hopefully taking us to more of an offensive posture, right, instead of the defensive one? So what's your last message for our audience here?
Well, from my perspective, I think that, no matter whether you think the glass is half empty or half full, the important thing is cybersecurity is something you're going to hear about in no matter what profession you go into. Understand it, understand risk, because at the end of the day, that's really what we're talking about. Whether you call it business risk, whether you call it corporate risk, whatever you want to call it, it's still about risk. Understand risk management, and understand that for you to be very competitive, to be at the top of whoever else you're competing with, that if you understand that risk, whether you're working for government or a nonprofit where it's all about reputational risk, or you're working for a corporation where it's really about financial risk, it won't matter. You will be able to speak the language, and you'll be able to give good advice to make that company or that organization more competitive and more reputational, for lack of a better word.
Thanks.
My advice is, just keep it simple, right? It's easy to get carried away with the buzzwords. Especially in my job, everybody wants to come in and talk about the latest and the greatest technology, or what are the risks with this? Big data, virtualization, mobility. They throw all these buzzwords, right? But at the end of the day, how many breaches or incidents are there where really some of this high-end technology was compromised, right? It's always about some user clicking on that email link, or some user using a very simple password-like password, or privileged credentials being shared. So let's not just always get carried away by the hype. I would say, it's about having good security hygiene, user awareness. If something doesn't look right, it probably isn't right? So I think a lot of it we can achieve some type of resiliency by really being mindful of our surroundings, keeping things simple, adopting those good practices. And I say keep it simple. Of course, there is always yes, I can go invest in, probably the high-end technology, or I can put the next generation firewalls or the intrusion detection systems. But at the end of the day, really a lot of your holes are insider threat, or it's one of your guys doing something stupid, right?
Mm-hmm. Stephanie?
So my advice would be to think about what's it going to take to get it right. I think we can spend a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror and saying, okay, well, this is a threat, and this is a threat, and this is a threat. If you think in the next 10 years what you're going to see from a technology perspective, the ability to disintermediate human error in and of itself is really exciting, I think, and it could make lives everywhere in the world better. But we've got to think positively, and we have to think about how do we make it safer in a way that's good for everyone, as opposed to thinking only about the threat itself.
Great.
Yeah, my advice would be do something that you're passionate about. It would be horrible to get into a career field where you don't even really enjoy what you're doing and getting out of bed in the morning and going in. Lucky for anybody who's here who cares about cybersecurity, and we've touched on it all afternoon, everything uses cybersecurity nowadays. So I mean, I think if I was doing this all over again, like I love baseball. I mean, you take your cybersecurity engineering and computer science degree, you minor in whatever it is, maybe it has something to do with sports, and guess what? There are going to be people in the Major League Baseball who are hiring people who are protecting their networks and their data and the rest of that.
Or you
And
could
so-
just mash up big data and create your own
Absolutely.
betting ring or something.
Exactly. So, I mean, I know it's maybe a little bit facetious, but do something that you care deeply about and are passionate about. And if you find that and you do that, you will find that your trajectory for 30, 40, 50 years, you never get tired of it.
So Rob, Stephanie, Anil, Rupangi, thank you so much for your time, and thank you very much from the audience. I'm going to invite Dean Corman over here to actually do some presentations. So.
I hope everyone enjoyed and learned from our panel. I certainly did. To conclude the panel, again, I'd like to thank all of the panelists and especially our moderator, Mr. Naeem Hussain. So let's give them a round of applause. We have some small presents, so we'd like to present those to you. So if you can be a little patient, and we'll go through that.